Gender ideology, the moral panic that is sparking debate and spreading hate across the nation.
Let's get into it.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective podcast. I'm your host, Carbon.
And I'm Emily.
And welcome to the show.
Today we're going to be taking you through how this moral panic around gender theory has been spreading through North American society. And then we're going to deep dive into moral panics in general and gender theory.
Let's go. So I think that we all are aware of the recent transphobic and just honestly generally anti-woman bills that are starting to come up and pass in the United States. But let's talk a little bit about how that's really infiltrating the minds of Canadians and spreading to Canada.
As a lot of us may have heard, there was a recent hate-motivated stabbing at the University of Waterloo, taking place sadly at the end of Pride Month in June against a professor and two of her students in a gender studies class.
I personally have a connection to this story because my sister goes to that university. While she wasn't in the gender studies class, she did give me more info about how it happened. And honestly, in terms of actual physical proximity to the stabbing, she was extremely close. She was in the same hall that it happened in. So that was just very scary for her and then for me to hear afterwards. And I'm just so happy that she was okay. I'm also happy to hear that although injured, the students and the professor who got stabbed, they're going to be okay as well.
Yeah, there was no critical injuries, which to say is lucky, but also I would point to the fact that we have stronger gun laws in Canada. And
that's true.
If this person were to come in with a gun, a lot more people would have been dead.
It's just so insane to me that somebody can target a gender studies class just for it being gender studies. Like, that's insane. In university, like, people are choosing to study this. It's not like it's the rhetoric that many people bring up, which is that it's being shoved down people's throats, which is not.
And then we see this kind of coming up again in another group in Canada, which is called YYC Muslims. So this is a far-right conservative Muslim group in Canada. They have around 14,000 members on Facebook.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So it's fairly big. And they have seemingly joined forces with far-right Christians, evangelical Christians in Canada. Together, they're fighting against LGBTQ plus community and more specifically what they call gender ideology in school. They are seen at these protests chanting, "Leave our kids alone." And they were joined by seniors wearing t-shirts with biblical verses on them, which is
my God.
interesting. But when they were asked by reporters, what are you actually worried about here? What are we pointing to? Is there anything actually in the curriculum? They didn't have anything like substantial that they're like, take that out. It's just more about gender ideology. Like, they're just scared of this. And this is kind of bringing in the moral panic, right?
Yeah.
They're just sort of like scared in general of queer people. They're pointing to the fact that they just don't want to see queer people in the media anywhere. They don't want to see rainbow flags up. They don't want rainbow crosswalks. That's kind of where it comes from.
That's insane. This is giving like Red Scare. This is giving Lavender Scare. This is
satanic panic,
Yeah.
the fear of video games, fear of alcohol.
Everything is against us. How about that? So is there anything in the curriculum that is gender ideology being shoved down kids' throats, as they say?
No, and they can't point to it. And I think what they're really scared of is the internet. This is where so many of these kids are learning all of this terminology because kids have this boundless information for themselves now where they're able to explore their own gender.
A lot of these kids that are learning gender identity, gender fluidity, all that stuff is actually coming from their peers, not from the teachers.
Exactly. It comes from peers and the internet.
Yeah, and they discuss it at school because that's where their peers are. It doesn't mean that exists in the actual school curriculum.
Obviously, the curriculum varies from province to province in Canada because, like I said, it is a provincial topic and issue, but it's always faced pushback.
We already have an episode about sex ed in school, so make sure you check that out.
It's with the lovely Eva Bloom,
where we go deeper into that topic. And it absolutely is an age-appropriate way to teach sex ed. It doesn't mean always about like genitals or sex itself, by the way. Yeah. So it seems to me that we are caught in the middle of another gender-related moral panic. So I want to ask you, should we panic?
I'd say let's slow down first and explore the different stages of a moral panic, and we can can chat about where we are in this timeline and what we should do next as a community to protect our rights and the people coming after us. So the first stage is worry and hostility. This comes from a sense that things are changing around them in a way that they do not like. New things are coming and they're not into it. They want things to stay the same. Can you think of any examples?
I mean, change is happening all the time around us at every moment of every day. You saw the most recent panic around the AI changes. Before that, it was the creation of the internet. Before that, it was getting rid of dial-up telephones where women serviced the actual dials of where your telephone connection was going to. And it was like, oh my God, we're going to lose all our jobs. And it's like they found new jobs. As things continue to evolve, you create new job opportunities as you solve one problem and create a new one. But that is just jobs. It also happens when it comes to societal standards, when it comes to just how we function as a human population as a whole.
And I think just in terms of the cycle of adaptation to certain things, a lot of people see this as like a marketing term for brands, but there's so few of us who are early adopters. Like you'll go out and you'll buy the latest technology, the newest thing that Apple puts out. And I would say the same thing goes for all like social norms as well. It's like there's the trendsetters, the people who are pushing the needle forward, who have been some of the first people to identify as non-binary and really fiercely stand in their position and tell people that you have to respect my pronouns.
I mean, fear of change is just so well known. It is so common for so many people. But if we feared change and never accepted it, then we wouldn't be in houses with mics in front of our faces, with cameras. We wouldn't be cooking food on stovetops. We would still be hunting food. We would be gathering food. And we wouldn't even have created fire. We wouldn't have domesticated fire. Like, get over it. Things change, you know, and we have to kind of change with it. Otherwise, you get stuck behind and you become so resentful, so bitter to the changes around you, to the point where you're just a miserable human being who doesn't enjoy life.
Period. Moving on to the next.
Moving on. That's what I got to say about that.
So the next is that it leads to a media frenzy. This is where the unease around a certain topic leads to a media campaign against it. A big example is the one against video games. There was a certain period of time where so many people were so scared about video games. It was like all you were seeing on the news is that this is going to hurt your kid. This is going to turn them into a killer. All these shooting games, everything like that. And of course, we see this as a campaign against queer people as well. Another huge moral panic and media frenzy happened around the AIDS pandemic when people were calling it GRID, a gay-related immune disorder. And so much of the media was tacking onto this and people started to be scared to be around gay people.
Which we now know, based on our previous podcast called The Entire History of Lesbians, that AIDS was not a gay-related immune disorder whatsoever, and it can affect everybody.
The next is folk devils.
What is folk devils?
Okay, so this is when it turns into a full-out witch hunt. They've found their enemy, they've targeted the enemy, and you really have your bad guy solidified.
So trans people?
Exactly. I would say trans people and just like queer people in general have really been turned into the bad guy of this whole moral panic around gender theory.
Which is like, my guy, we're just existing.
It's getting to the point, though, where they're not even just targeting trans people in the queer community anymore. It's going so far to the point where they want things to revert to such an older time of ideals where they want to take away women's rights. So they want to take it even further.
That's scary to think about.
Don't feel too sad yet. We're gonna bring it back up for you. But we're still gonna go a little bit farther down first. So hold on to your seat. But the next piece is, of course, harsh new laws. And we're seeing this taking place in the States right now. Of course, in Canada, we're a little bit farther back on this timeline. We haven't seen harsh new laws get introduced yet. But I really want people to see this as a cautionary tale.
Yeah, because it can easily happen here.
We're starting to see the warning signs happening in Canada. That's why we wanted to bring up those two cases at the beginning of this episode, because we really wanted to signify and really highlight the fact that these things are starting to seep into Canadian culture right now, and we really need to be on high alert so that it doesn't go any further.
Agreed.
So really around harsh new laws is this idea that while they're still holding on to the majority when it comes to lawmaking, that they want to push forward these laws to protect and preserve culture as it stands. A lot of the time you'll hear, especially around moral panics, they really lean into this idea of needing to protect the children.
Oh my God.
This is such
I'm
a
so
common
tired
theme.
of this.
This happens in almost every single moral panic is about protecting the children.
That's right. Wasn't the Satanic Panic also about protecting the children?
Of course. Yeah. Video games protecting the children.
Right. Just because somebody else is raising children in a way that you wouldn't raise them doesn't mean that you're not. And it has nothing to do with you.
They're scared of becoming the minority in terms of
Oh my God.
overall thought in society. That's what they're really trying to protect with these laws, is maintaining and pushing forward their viewpoints and punishing the opposition. And this is really in an effort to show that the world is going to remain the same. And it's such a stronghold position. And this comes in the form of bans, prohibitions, restrictions, etc. So we're coming back up.
Okay, strap in.
The next is things don't change.
What do you mean?
So remarkably, throughout history, we've seen that the laws that are put into place don't actually change society. The floodgates have already opened. It's seeping through. People are doing things a bit more in private, especially in fears of these laws, of course. But the opposition to these bills, in this case, queer people, start pushing back. They start voting more in masses. They start protesting. They start voting in people who hold the same ideals as them, and they turn the tables.
That's a little bit of poetic justice, isn't it? You try to close the gates firmer and firmer, put locks all around it, and that actually creates a bigger movement against that, which is hilarious because their hopes is that everybody stays contained within those gates. And you're like, you know what? The gates weren't there before, and now I hate the gate so much that I wasn't active politically prior to, but now I will be.
Exactly. It wakes a lot of people up.
It's like reverse psychology, really. You're not winning the battle by becoming stricter. You're actually enhancing the movement that was barely there before, but now is strong.
And what I want to say is that while a lot of conservatives and Republicans, they want to scare you. They really want to scare a lot of these brands as well. They want to say, we can cancel you.
Go woke, go broke.
Go woke, go broke, where it's in reality, it's are they going broke or are you just threatening their CEOs?
On the other hand, more liberal or queer people, more progressive people start supporting that brand more and more.
Of course.
So do they really go broke?
No. I mean, we saw this with the Barbie movie. They're saying the same stuff. They're Bud Light effect, go woke, go broke.
You say that this movie is the slickest, most visually appealing, and therefore most insidious packaging of feminist cliches and trans grooming that you have ever seen.
I don't really know what they were thinking. They just gave Barbie the Bud Light treatment, which probably looks pretty stupid in retrospect.
Yeah, I mean, Tudor, it just, I don't get it. I mean, I have more Barbies than I can count in my house because of all my girls. Why won't they let our little girls have anything? It's not even profitable. I mean, Disney lost $900 million on the last 3 woke children's films they put out.
And it's this top grossing movie of what, all time?
The Barbie movie be setting all kinds of revenue records these days.
Barbie bandwagon shows no sign of slowing down. Makers Warner Brothers say it has now passed over $1 billion at the global box office, which means for Greta Gerwig, she's become the first woman to reach the milestone as a solo director.
One thing to note too is it has a majority woman audience and a majority of queer audience as well.
So what happens next?
The morning after. This is when the majority of people wake up. The laws start to get passed in favor of the other side. We're seeing prohibitions ending, bans ending, and people are like, oh, this isn't so bad.
I mean, you're always scared of what you don't know. You're scared of things that you don't understand. That's really it. That's all that it is. It's not because something is bad. It's because you don't understand it. People are scared of what they can't relate to. But through time, patience, a lot of time, they start to get it. And they start to, at the minimum, at least tolerate it more and understand that we're all human beings just trying to live our life on this world. And the human experience is a silly little thing that nobody understands or knows the answer to. So why not just live it your way? Like McDonald's.
Whoa, yeah, that really sounded like a slogan.
Or Burger King? Was it Burger King?
I don't know. Have it your way.
Have it your way.
Not
sponsored.
So we're going to quiz you a little bit. Where do you think we are in this timeline right now? And I would say we're at different stages, the US versus Canada. So let us know both.
I think in Canada, we are currently at folk devils. And in the States, it's harsh new laws. So what do you think, though?
I think I would agree with that. Where we are right now as Canadians is sort of up in the air. We're seeing a lot of these small groups are leading these like frenzies. I haven't necessarily seen it come out as like a media frenzy, I'd say, where people are being blatantly anti-trans. Of course, it's like a very different media landscape in the States with Fox News and like so much right-wing news happening there. But one thing has really changed in recent years, and that's the way that Canadians consume news. So many people are consuming Fox News and are consuming right-wing news via the internet as well.
Yes.
So it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where we are. I would agree with you that I think a lot of people are seeing trans people as like the folk devils now. It is hard to pinpoint how much of this has like seeped into
I think
the
quite a
minds of
bit. I've been
Canadians.
seeing it on social media, like a drag queen's post
True.
about her next event or something like that. And people saying, always like commenting like groomers, without anything to back it up. It's like, that's scary and not okay. You know absolutely nothing about this person and you're calling them a groomer. For what reason, under what premise, what evidence do you have? None.
I would say you just hit me with the perfect point, proof, and comment.
Boom.
And I give you an A+.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the first A+ I've gotten in a long time.
So obviously, all of us in the community, we want to get to that point where we're not seeing things change and we're at that morning after where people have realized it ain't so bad and we're able to start moving forward and making those progressive gains again. I think a lot of fear happening right now is like, oh my God, we're moving backwards. A lot of people are feeling like, oh, we're living at the worst time in history right now. So many bad things are happening, but I think
that's debatable.
Exactly. Well, one thing I want to say, even just to like ease people's minds and to encourage people to get back into action, because I think this level of fear of this is the worst time in history, things are so bad, it can paralyze you with fear. And it takes away the level of action that is important to get us to the point where we're at that morning after. And we're at the point where there's so much action taking place where there's even stronger bills being put in place. So what I would say is to take a look at things in terms of a grander timeline. For example, if you were to ask your grandparents, is this the worst time it's ever been? Potentially they wouldn't.
Probably not, because there was world wars when they were alive.
It's
all relative, right? It's all relative as to like what you have seen, what you have experienced, and what you personally consider to be the worst.
And they also experienced a time when gay rights, women's rights were nowhere near where they are today.
Right.
And of course, we're really scared of things moving back to where they were, but we're in a much better position than they were fighting from. Look at it in the grander scheme. I think that really helps. But then the next is, let's take some direct action. One, if you're a really busy person, but you have some money in the bank, donate to legal defense funds that are fighting against these bills in the United States.
Here's $5.
Or more, if you can afford more. The next is vote. I can't express how important it is to get out and vote.
And that's free.
And in Canada, it's so easy. There's so many barriers to voting happening in the States right now, but I cannot express how easy they make it to vote in Canada. I don't know what it's like for people living in more rural areas, but for us in Toronto, it is so easy to vote.
Literally, we went in unregistered, registered in 5 minutes, and we're out in like 7 total.
Make sure that you're voting, because it is such a privilege for us to have the right to vote, to have the right to say something in terms of where our country is going. To me, it really makes me sad how low our turnouts are.
And there's no way that everybody's just like, yep, I'm perfectly happy with exactly how it is and I'm not going to vote because everything's great. No way. We get the government that we vote for.
Exactly.
So vote.
Which, if you don't vote,
you got no say. You can't complain.
The next is volunteer. So you can volunteer for different political campaigns that share your values, that are going to make that change happen that you're looking to have happen. You can also volunteer for different LGBTQ causes as well, different organizations that are pushing things forward. The next would be go to rallies and go to protests. And you can also volunteer for the organizations that are organizing these rallies and protests if you want to take it a step further. And then last but not least, I think this is one angle that we really like to take, creating, sharing, and making queer content. Continue to educate people and share our stories when so many people in like the mainstream are trying to suppress them right now, I think is something that's really important to continue getting their message out. Period. That's what we have to say around moral panic. Mic drop. Let's get into gender theory.
Get into the sauce.
The reason that we really wanted to dive into this topic is because when I'm looking through news articles and listening to podcasts specifically covering these issues about the different protests and different incidences happening where people are protesting against gender theory or gender ideology, as they'll call it, is a lot of the times people actually don't even know how to define or describe gender theory.
I agree with that. I was listening to a news podcast on CBC about gender ideology.
Yeah.
And they themselves, the journalists, couldn't define it. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, you just wrote a whole article on this and you didn't even look into it. I'm like, huh? So we're going to take it upon ourselves. We're going to educate you. So one thing that we pulled a lot of this information from is a Big Think video on YouTube that I think is just really well produced and done. So we'll put that into the notes of this episode so you can go and check that out. But it's basically like a free, beautifully created lecture from one of the founders of like a left-leaning gender theory, who is Judith Butler. And she does just a really lovely job. I wish she was my professor. It was so nice.
Wish she was my mom.
I wish she was my mom. Imagine Judith Butler being your mom.
Imagine.
One thing that she states in this is that there are many different theories on gender. So I think this is kind of where a lot of people get mixed up and they just say gender ideology, scared of it.
Like one thing.
And people who are opposing gender ideology actually have some of the strongest ideas on gender.
Okay.
And the strongest gender ideology. So it's not just the people on the left who have gender ideology or a gender theory. Everyone has a theory on gender.
Say more right now.
Really what this is it can be boiled down to the assumptions that we walk around with of what gender should be, i.e. a lot of religious people would say that women should be at home, they should be doing the cooking, the cleaning, and their main job is to be people who birth children and care for children, and that it's the man's job to do the work.
Most gender stereotypes exist because they reflect the way that men and women are naturally different, and those differences aren't bad. Men and women complement each other and create a well-balanced family and community. So don't let anyone tell you it's bad to fit stereotypes. Those people are just trying too hard to be cool. If you want to dress up in a girly dress, do it. Make yourself pretty. Master the art of makeup. Embrace the idea of being a wife or a mother. And allow yourself to stay at home to raise your children.
That is really your gender theory.
That is a gender ideology.
One of the most dominant ones, I would say. So I think the basis really of this that we first need to understand before we go forward is the difference between sex and gender. And we do this in so many of our videos. I feel like we're constantly having to explain the difference between sex and gender because people just don't want to listen. And a lot of people feel like they're like making a slam dunk when they're really talking about sex. So sex refers to your biology, that is male and female. That comes down to your genitalia.
And
Intersex.
there's also intersex people. So it's still not a slam dunk when you say there's only two sexes. It is not. And even just under the umbrella of intersex, that can look differently per person.
A video where we really saw this happening, where people are so confused about the difference between sex and gender and they feel like they're slam dunking on the left, was this video of Carrie Lake. I don't know who she is. I guess she's like a famous conservative woman. They say she owns New York Times and Washington Post reporters.
Which one of you's from the New York Times? You know there's only two genders, right? There's only two genders, and they know that in Iowa. I challenge the New York Times reporter and the Washington Post reporter to try to milk a cow and then try to milk a bull and see how that goes.
She owned them.
Boom. Yeehaw.
Try and milk a bull.
You can't.
Point
Therefore, there's two genders.
So she's clearly confusing sex and gender there. Gender is a mix of cultural norms. So it's really historical formations, family influences, desires, and wishes. And we have a say in what our gender is. We decide what our gender is, even though a lot of the time it feels very imposed on us. But sex is what we are born with.
Which can be male, can be female, can be a mix of both. Really depends on how you come out.
So the gender theory that we're going to be diving into next is, I guess, left-leaning gender theory, because we spoke about the fact that there are a broad range of gender theories, but this is really the one that I guess people are all Hufflepuffing about.
Hufflepuff.
So let's talk about it. So this one's the most important, and this is that gender theory does not deny the biological differences between male, female, and intersex bodies. I think this is one of the biggest pieces that people are confused about and that they're like so firm on. I think it's the word gender. They're like, male and female is gender, and they like won't let it go. I'm like, do we need new words? Like, what's going on?
Maybe we do.
I'm like, I'll give you sex. They don't want sex. They don't want it.
They don't want it.
I'm like, I agree with you. It's just a different word. The next is that most leftist gender theorists, however, do not believe that our biological differences, aka our sex, determines who we are in some kind of final way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
We'll elaborate on that further, of course, but this is just kind of setting a baseline for what left-leaning gender theory is. The last is, and this really ties into the first two, but the sex that you're assigned at birth and the gender that you are taught to be should not determine how you live your life. A lot of this stemmed from feminist thinkers, so people who didn't think that women should just be homemakers. Their whole thought process is the fact that I am born female, raised a woman. I don't think this means that I have to get a husband, just keep the home and have children. And of course, it can also mean that you were born male doesn't mean that you have to live your life as a man. To explain dominant gender theory, it's important to go through some of the most prominent thought leaders in this space, because this has really been changing and evolving since the 1940s. So let's talk about one of the first leaders in the gender theory space, and this is Simone De Beauvoir. She wrote The Second Sex in the 1940s. This was really like dubbed as the first manifesto of the liberated woman. So the basic point of this book, the TLDR, is that one is not born a woman, but rather becomes one. That the body is not a fact. She opened up the possibility of a difference between the sex that you're assigned and the sex that you become.
This was in the 1940s.
Really ahead of her time.
She was really ahead of her time then.
So the next is Gail Rubin. She wrote an extremely influential article called The Traffic in Women, Notes on the Political Economy of Sex. In this article, what she tried to say was that the family was a structure whose task it was to reproduce gender, with one of its goals being to keep heterosexuality looking really normal. This article really allowed us to look at gender as something that could be reproduced, cultivated, crafted, and there are frameworks to which gender belong. So it's really a beginning point where we started to question gender and how we see it as something that is made up and created by human beings. Another part of her work was surrounding psychoanalysts. She questioned whether there was a whole lot of repression into becoming a man and into becoming a woman.
Very good questions.
We know now.
Yes.
Yes. She said and believed that one of the things that we have to do to conform with existing gender norms is to rule out all of this beautiful being, feeling, doing, and loving that don't line up with current gender norms that are governing and ruling our lives. The last is Judith Butler. So she's a Berkeley professor and author. She wrote Gender Trouble. In the 1990s, when this was published, was a time really when people treated gender as a natural fact and not something that could be made and remade. So that's just kind of like an important context of where things were in the world. And I think that's also important to note in this episode is that the 1990s, really, in the early 2000s, is a time when a lot of these people who are having this big moral panic right now, that's the time that they're longing for, is a time when they could be really blatantly homophobic, transphobic, and no one would say anything. But these times are shifting.
Oh, how the tables have turned.
Oh, how the tables have turned.
So really what Judith Butler does is state that gender is a performance. So this is kind of where...
Drag?
A bit. So this is kind of where her thinking takes it a bit further from previous thought leaders. Another thing she says is that despite the fact that they're a performance, that does not make them fake. So gender isn't fake. It's presentation, but it's definitely not fake.
Right.
So she really thinks about like what makes something real. By us doing it and enacting it, that makes it real.
I kind of like that.
Yeah, it is cool. I mean, I think it puts a lot of validity into how we feel on the inside and like as well as like our gender dysphoria that we experience. Yeah. It's like that's real, that's valid because you're feeling it and now you are enacting and making your gender a presentation of how you feel.
Yeah, I do like that, because then coming back to drag, just because somebody is doing something in drag and it's different than how they do it as like their everyday selves, doesn't mean that it's a fake thing. It means that it's a different expression of themselves.
Totally.
Which is what drag is.
Through your performance of gender, you are actually realizing that gender anew, which I think is really empowering and really cool. It's like, it's valid. Just by you saying it and doing it, you are real and valid, and
you're creating it.
Totally, which I love that. So this is really cool. And I think this really signifies just the changing of reality that has been happening since the 1990s to present day. So let's kind of talk about that big shift that has been taking place since all of this literature has come out, and since trans people and queer people have become more visible in the media and just in like everyday culture. When we started living openly in the world, reality changed as we know it. We no longer speak about family, sex, gender, women, men, all in the same way. All of these things have changed if you think about it. Sure, there's a lot of late adopters, people who are resistant to this change, who don't want to speak about it in the way. But in terms of dominant culture, the way that people speak about things, it has shifted.
True.
For example, even the Cambridge Dictionary recognizes this with their definition of women, with their definition of men. For example, their definition of women is an adult who lives and identifies as female, though they may have been said to have a different sex at birth. Everything has been shifting over time. So I would say that we have made such progress over the last few decades, and it's important to recognize that and celebrate that. Despite all this progress that we're making, there are people who are scared of it.
Something that I truly don't understand, and that I hope that people start to move away from, is that by giving somebody power, aka power to vote, power to be themselves, power to have a say in what happens, it doesn't take away any of your power. And I think that a lot of these people that are so fearful and against queer rights, women's rights, trans rights, are fearful that their power is being taken away. When in reality, you can spread that. There is no shortness of power to be had. Everyone has an equal say. By wanting to take rights away from women, from queer people, from trans people, it's removing equality. By giving power to them, it doesn't take anything away from you. It's actually just removing inequality. People need to understand that they are not any less of a woman or a man or whatever they identify as because somebody else is also taking up space. There's plenty of space to be had. It's an arbitrary thing. It's not a finite thing.
I think it's scary for people who have lived their lives and seen their ancestors live their lives in a space where white men had all of the opportunities. Everything was given to them. And now having to share it, for them it feels like I'm losing something, but it's like, no, it's becoming equal. This is what sharing feels like. This bowl is big enough to feed everyone.
Everybody can eat from this plate and have everyone be full. Nobody has to starve.
So how did this episode make you feel? Like, what are your thoughts now in terms of everything that is happening, in terms of gender theory, in terms of moral panics? What are you thinking?
Honestly, it just reconfirmed what I had thought all along, which is that people are just afraid of what they don't know. But it also taught me to think in a new way, which is that gender ideology has always existed in different forms. And that is something so important to keep in mind and to continue to bring up when it comes to these discussions and conversations.
I think one thing that I found really uplifting just in terms of researching and putting this episode together was the cycle of moral panics and just seeing that throughout history, it does come to a conclusion. Each one has ended, but it has taken a lot of work from organizers, activists. So it's been a motivation, definitely. Reading this and looking at this, I'm like, okay, we can get through this. We've gotten through this in the past, but it is going to take everyone standing up and pushing back against it.
So that is everything that we have for you today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe because we put out new episodes every single week and you don't want to miss them. If you like this video and want to check out more on the entire history of lesbians, click this video right over here. Until next time. Peace.
Thanks for watching.